Rotary engines are unreliable, hard to maintain, inefficient, and dangerous. Or so some people on the internet would like you to believe. We're on a mission to build the most reliable and easiest to maintain rotary setup we can afford. In this episode, we'll be starting to tear down the old engine and going through all the bits we can and will be reusing in the new build. For those of you who are new here, this is my FD RX7 project that we're pretty much doing a complete overhaul and restoration on. We'll be going over the entire car, replacing or upgrading almost every component. It'll be getting a single turbo conversion along with a custom fuel, oil, and cooling system in addition to a myriad of other upgrades, most of which we went over in the last couple episodes, so feel free to go back and watch those later if you want to get caught up. Now, the internet is fairly divided these days on rotary engines. Plenty of people will tell you they can be reliable and safe if you build and maintain them correctly, while others will never touch one again and swear that an engine swap is the only way to go. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I didn't have a million reservations about keeping the car rotary. However, I wanted to experience and enjoy the RX-7 the way it was designed, and that means keeping this wonky fidget spinner of an engine. So let's tear down this old motor and talk about some of the reasons these engines have gotten such a bad rap. I don't think rotaries are for the faint of heart and definitely require more attention than your average sports car. Sadly, many of them end up in the hands of people who treat them more like eco boxes than performance vehicles. Now, I say that because I have a prime example right here. This is the nastiest motor I've ever torn down, and I've worked on some crusty old engines in my time, most of which had many more miles than this one could possibly have, considering it was probably rebuilt at least once. Even then, there was oil, coolant crud, and disintegrated plastic everywhere. The wiring harness was just completely cooked in so many places, and this is a great example of why turbo rotaries are notorious for wiring issues. As a point of comparison, I've seen this happen maybe once on a turbo engine from a Toyota.
If you ever want to know why rotaries have wiring issues, just look at how brittle these wires have become. There's snap everywhere. So anytime you have to work in here, you know, if you got a 30-year-old car that's been cooking itself for this long, the second you touch anything, these wires are just going to break and you're going to have grounding issues and signal issues.
Half the wires on the hot side of this engine were like this, not to mention the number of connectors that were so cooked they cracked with the slightest bit of pressure. Now, I'm not saying no one should try and keep a factory twin turbo system, but Jesus Christ, you have to be some kind of masochist to want to keep something like this running, if you're actually going to drive it. Car collectors don't really count as they don't actually use their cars that much.
I actually think I want to start making fun of low mileage cars and just being like, what happened? You couldn't afford to, it's so sad you couldn't afford to drive it more. Like, and just start bullying people with low mileage cars and just make fun of them. Because I'm like, why do we think that's cool?
In the last video, I mentioned the car was technically running when I bought it. The guy I got it from cranked it over and it immediately shot out white smoke, then turned it off quickly. So I just assumed it was a failing coolant seal and believed it needed to be rebuilt. Now, let me show you what I found when I got the intake and exhaust manifolds off.
So I pulled off the exhaust manifold. It starts leaking oil. I was like, oh, that's probably not good. Then I realized I might have been a dumbass and completely forgot to drain the oil before pulling the motor. Because that would be something I would do, right? So, let's see. Did we forget to drain the oil when we pulled the motor? The answer is no, we didn't. There's just oil stuck in the engine, apparently. So check this out. Pull this off. And oil just starts weeping out of that, so I guess it's just stuck inside. Alright, at least I don't feel stupid. Well, I feel stupid, but I don't feel as stupid. Alright, so we're gonna try and get our first look at the inside of the engine. Oh! Oh! Well, that's nice. Oh! Jesus Christ. Oh, that is, I mean, someone want to tell me if that's, bad? Oh, there is so much oil in here. That can't be good.
Apparently, I didn't notice or remember the smoke being at all blue, but it definitely wasn't a coolant seal leak. I'm pretty sure this means the oil control rings are shot, but I guess we'll know for sure when we eventually open this up. Has anyone else ever seen this much oil in their rotor housings? Let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. I'd really appreciate it and it definitely helps out a lot. The rest of the teardown went as you would expect. There were a few stubborn stuck-on hoses and lines, but overall it wasn't too bad outside of being filthy. Half the time I would just stare at things trying to understand how some of it worked.
Can someone tell me why there's 2 hose clamps there? Just why?
The previous owner did little things like an air pump delete and pin the manifold wastegate open. I assume this was to make the system no longer work sequentially. From what I understand, pinning this open basically means the pre-control system no longer functions. Aside from those bits, the engine appears to be completely stock. Even the unused solenoids are still in place. I do love seeing things like screws being used to plug vacuum lines. Really makes me feel like the car received nothing but the best attention. Now that we have everything apart, we're going to go through all the bits that we can use for the single turbo conversion. We'll also be talking about why we will or won't be using some of these specific parts. First off is the throttle body. The factory unit is totally acceptable for the power level we're going for and will work just fine. However, we won't be using it as we're converting to a large GM drive-by-wire unit. I was originally planning on using this 90mm option, but might opt for this slightly newer 87mm unit as it's more compact and just looks nicer in my opinion. Also, newer, better,
New is always better.
Next up is the intake manifold. While many people upgrade to something like the turbo in a race-only unit, we really don't need that kind of flow for the boost and power we'll be making. Also, the factory manifold's runner system is actually quite good for low-end torque, which is nice for street driving. Since we're only aiming to make about 350 to 400 wheel horsepower, it's perfectly fine to reuse, though it could use a good cleaning. One other thing to mention about the factory intake manifold that I thought was really cool are these secondary butterfly valves. From what old forum posts say, the factory system uses them to reduce power during warm-up and then opens them up after that. However, my tuner Ryan came up with a pretty neat idea on how to use them for fine-tuning low-end power and other fancy wizardry. This is done by connecting the actuator to a vacuum solenoid box to control when it's open and closed. The idea is, with a single large throttle body connected to the manifold, you can close the valves by applying vacuum and cram all the air into the inner runners. The increased velocity of air improves low-end torque, and this in turn helps build RPMs and boost faster, making the whole system more responsive. While the benefits would be much more impactful on something like a semi-peripheral port engine, it should offer some nice drivability improvements on our less extreme setup. If you want to hear more details about it, I'll probably discuss it more down the line when we get it all set up, or you can watch Ryan's videos on it, which I'll link down in the description. Now let's move on to the fuel system. The original injectors can technically support the power level we're aiming for, but we'd have to run them at a very high duty cycle, so they're not ideal. The rails themselves could offer enough flow for what we need, but finding higher flow side feed fuel injectors for them or modifying the rail or original injectors just isn't that practical. It offers no real benefit unless you're planning to keep the air pump for emissions or trying to keep everything all original. Also, the factory fuel lines are a bit of a bottleneck, so we'll be replacing those as well. We'll be upgrading to a full Radium setup using their primary and secondary rails fed by Dash 8 AM lines. The Radium and most aftermarket rails allow you to run common top feed fuel injectors like the ID 1050X we've selected for the primary system and ID 1750X for the secondary system. As the name implies, these are Injector Dynamics 1050cc and 1750cc injectors. These will offer more than enough fuel for our power needs, and we can run them at a much lower duty cycle. This means we'll have more consistent and predictable fuel delivery, which is important if we want the engine to last. We'll also be upgrading the other bits of the fuel system like the pumps, main lines, filter, and wiring. We'll even be adding a surge tank setup, but we'll cover all of that more in detail when we get there. Next is the water filler neck and pump housing. As far as I know, everyone reuses the pump housing. It's cast aluminum, and the only thing wrong with it for our build is the old slip-on hose fitting. The plan is to pull out all the old fittings and press in or weld on AN fittings. We'll also be cutting off the lower radiator hose barb and having a Dash 16 fitting welded on there. Not only do I think it looks cool, but the CSF radiator will be using comes with Dash 16 fittings already. The filler neck is a tough one. It can be reused, however a lot of people replace it with some type of AST delete. Whether it's a swirl pot system or raised top design, both allow you to remove the factory air separator tank. This is generally advisable as the AST is known to cause problems on the FD. They both serve the same function of raising the filler cap to the highest point of coolant in the engine bay and allowing air to rise and bleed out of the system in that location. While both systems have proven to work just fine, I felt overkill was underrated. So we'll be building an expansion tank system using a radiant coolant tank, which will act as both an expansion tank and a swirl pot. We'll be mounting the tank in this area, creating a high point in the system which will aid in air removal while increasing the overall capacity of coolant. With this setup, the expanding coolant will stay in the fully pressurized system instead of bleeding out into the overflow. There's still an overflow tank and pressurized cap, but you typically don't see it used often outside of extreme pressure buildup. The extra coolant in the expansion tank continuously cycles through the system, removing air and increasing fluid volume. Overall, it's a much better system, it's just a little more complex and there are additional costs when adding something like this. That being said, it isn't really any more expensive than a race-only AST delete and only a little bit more expensive than most swirl pots. So while not your typical choice, I want to design the most robust cooling system possible, and this is part of it. Next, we have the ignition system and wiring harness. The ignition system is commonly upgraded with some type of coil upgrade for better spark, but technically this can be reused. However, we'll be replacing this with a set of IGM-1A smart coils from Haltech. The IGM-1A coils offer exceptionally high power levels while retaining the option of a longer spark duration. In the past, you kind of had to choose between the high power output of a capacitive coil or the longer duration of an inductive system. The IGM-1A is an inductive system that is capable of a longer spark duration but offers extremely high output when needed, giving you the best of both worlds. I won't go into the nerdy details too much, but basically at idle or partial throttle, you don't get the best atomization of fuel. And with that, a short duration ignition burst doesn't always fully ignite the fuel, which can lead to misfires. A long duration spark helps get full combustion in those conditions. On the flip side, the high power output burst capabilities improve ignition at high RPM with more air and fuel in the combustion chamber. Now, let's move on to the wiring. This is another one where technically you can reuse it if it's in good shape, but in most situations the factory harness is beyond saving. Mine was cooked well done, as you can see, so the wires are just breaking off all over the place and it's pretty much junk. If your car already has a newer or aftermarket harness, there's a good chance it's reusable. In this case though, we need to rebuild or replace it. I'm opting for the replacement option as I hate wiring like most people. I built the engine harness for my V6 MR2 back in the day, and I am happy to pay someone a little extra to avoid that headache again. The last few bits might seem boring, but they're still important. The alternator belt tensioner and AC compressor are both things we can reuse. We'll definitely be keeping the AC compressor bracket and tensioner because there are no real alternatives or upgrades. We will be replacing the idler pulley, but that's a relatively small change. The alternator is totally reusable, but we won't be using this one or a factory replacement. Instead, the plan is to use the DC Power Engineering high output alternator. While the OE alternator is a solid option, it was a bit of a weak point for the FD. Excessive heat and age measurably reduced the output, sometimes as low as 13 volts instead of the 14.1 to 14.7 it should be making. A voltage drop can cause all sorts of issues ranging from poor idle to reduced engine performance. Also, any extra load on the system from something like a larger fuel pump or even an aftermarket stereo can cause a drop in voltage. So going from the factory 100 amp unit to a 180 amp alternator like the one from DC Power will shore up that weak point and make sure we don't have any voltage issues. Also, something to keep in mind when thinking about your alternators is that the pulley size matter. DC Power provides a pulley with their alternator that's specifically sized for the unit. If you swap that out for an underdrive pulley like the one from Race Only, let's say, you run the risk of underpowering your system. Most companies design their pulleys around OE components, so it's always good to check the math on everything. At the stock 750 RPM idle, the alternator with a factory size 2.2 pulley ratio will be spinning at about 1650 RPM. If we were to use something like the Race Only pulley, which has a 1.69 pulley ratio, at the stock 750 RPM engine idle, the alternator would now be spinning at 1250 RPM. Now, the DC Power alternator has a turn-on speed of 1624 alternator RPM, which means if we wanted to run an underdrive pulley on it, we'd need to bump the engine idle to over 960 RPM. While this isn't inherently an issue, it's just good to understand adjustments you might have to make depending on the parts you're slapping together for your build. Now, I mentioned earlier that the factory air pump was deleted, which means that the entire pulley system on that side of the engine is also missing. While this is a very common modification, it can cause a potential problem. The air pump pulley was part of the original serpentine belt system that drove the water pump. Most people just replace the belt with a shorter version and call it good. However, because of how the belt runs against the water pump pulley, losing the extra pulley from the air pump changes the surface area contact and friction on the water pump. Basically what can happen is the belt slips against the smooth factory pulley, causing a drop in coolant pressure. Now, I shall play the role of Captain Obvious and say that a drop in cooling performance on a rotary is less than ideal. Some companies make replacement pulleys for the water pump that add texture and are designed to mitigate belt slippage. However, the best way to remedy this issue is with an idler pulley. There are a handful of companies that make these, but they're basically just a bracket and pulley that take the place of the air pump and bring back the needed contact with the water pump pulley. I also realized I almost forgot to mention the engine mounts, which will be reusing the factory units. There are plenty of aftermarket ones out there that are nice and use polyurethane bushings, but I'd rather keep something a little bit more comfortable and don't like vibrations. Looking at you, K24 owners. Well, that pretty much covers everything we can and will be reusing from the old motor. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you watching. In the next couple episodes, we'll be going over more build details for the new engine. We'll also be covering some unconventional cooling upgrades that may be new for some of you, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.